everyone, welcome to Social with a Side of Justice, the podcast where we talk about real issues that impact our communities.
This season, we're focusing on mental health and why getting help isn't always easy.
We are looking at the challenges people face when trying to get support.
From stigma and cost to policy gaps and unequal access in different communities.
Throughout the season, we'll be talking with local mental health professionals to better understand how care works, what barriers exist, and what can be done to improve access.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Social with the Side of Justice. I'm Maria Eduarda.
I'm Maria Luisa.
And I'm Shayla, and we will be your hosts for today's episode.
Today we will be joined with Miss Carmen Vega, former principal here at the Long Branch Public Schools.
Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
To start, can you explain what Audrey W. Clark School is and how it is important to and how it supports students who may be struggling in traditional school settings?
Well, a traditional school setting is something that creates expectation that students should provide certain behaviors and take certain courses and the norm. But when you create a non-traditional school, you want it to fit the students that are coming to it, so you want it to be different. And one of the criticism is sometimes that why are those students doing this when the traditional school is doing that? Because they perform better in a different setting, and they perform better with non-traditional methods. The traditional school is formed in a way that students that don't need that can do very, very well, and it's important to them. And public education is extremely important because it services everyone. When you have a non-traditional program in a public school, it's wonderful because you get a lot of support, but also you get a lot of misunderstandings sometimes. But being able to educate the parents and other educators of what it is takes away some of the misunderstandings and, like you said, stigma. Because it could be very hard for a student that needs non-traditional to go to a non-traditional school and then be told by people in the traditional setting, why are you going there? Why do you have to be there? What are you, a bad kid? What did you do? And that student then creates shame, and shame is a horrible thing. Because you want to go to school and be able to produce the best you can. And when you do go to a setting that meets those needs, you're going to be okay. And I have many successful students that needed something different, and they were able to get it. So once we were in that setting that we created, and we started in 1990, 91, and mental health within the school settings was not a thing. People thought that was something that you got outside of school, that your parents gave you, that you didn't talk about it in school. So there was stigma related to that, and also there wasn't a lot of formats that were created to support what you would call now an emotional regulating school, right? Because the goal is to regulate behaviors and emotions, which everybody can benefit from. So we had to create our own method, and I came from a clinician background. I worked in a psychiatric hospital with some very talented clinicians, and my thing was psychoeducational and learning what you could do in terms of mental health, and that was not talked much about back then. So some of the things that we did later as we evolved, we did not do initially because it wasn't always understood why these kids are going to do this when the other kids are doing something else. And so I think that stigma initially was probably greater at that time because people really weren't exposed. And I always say the age of Oprah, when Oprah, which you guys probably can read about, when she had her show, she started talking about mental health. That opened the door for a lot of women that watched the show and a lot of people. And that really did change the attitudes throughout the country because people were now exposed to what is mental health as opposed to, shh, don't talk about it. And remember, family values, cultural values, some cultures don't talk about it. It's just a hush-hush, right? Or it's something that only happened to that kid, or they think it's a reflection because you're failing. Some cultures, if you're getting a C in a course, it could be a horrible thing, right? Or if you're feeling a little depressed, and I've spoken to people even today that don't want to use the word depression. They want to say, I'm sad. So we started with a lot of psychoeducational, trying to educate and also trying to take the shame. Now, I don't know how it is today, but educating the teachers in the traditional setting was very important too, so that when they spoke about Audrey W. Clark and Shaw, which is called today, they understand what is done there, and that transition is smooth and done in a kind manner.
And would you say that, like, especially back then when the school was just like a new topic, with the parents who had like a very traditional and like cultural like mindset, was it like harder for you, especially as a principal, to like explain to your the students' parents, why it was important for them to be enrolled in this school, and like what are kind of some of the challenges that, like, especially back then when mental health wasn't even like a big topic or was something that people tried to avoid, like how would you have enforced, or not enforced, but like advised the parents to maybe put them in these schools instead of the traditional schools?
That was a team approach, because usually the counselors that were working with the student in the main setting kind of prepared the student and the parent with the information, and then we had visits. The parent could come and visit, and I usually spend an hour or more with the parent. They'd tour the building, they'd meet the students so they could get comfortable with it and see that it was not a place that was extremely foreign to what they wanted for their child. So it was a team approach. Many of the counselors, the child study team, we all work together, and that's so important in a system that we're on the same page to know that that student would benefit. And then the parent, I have to tell you, most of the time the parents were very good, because all parents just want the best for a student, and they just, you may be frightened and you may have your expectations, right? But once they come into the building, the goal of the building was to be a safe, warm, caring place. And I think that anybody that did walk into the building and does walk to the building sees that there's a lot of care and love and respect for the students. And I think that would gain the respect of the parents, and it did.
And like, what would you say? I feel like a lot of the times, like we were talking about stigmas, and a lot of the stigmas that come with like Audrey W. Clark is like, oh wow, this is a different school. Especially you were talking about traditional and like non-traditional. How would you like explain like to parents like the difference? Sometimes it's like hard to have, like a lot of parents probably were understanding, but then there's the concept of, oh, like this is not what everyone else is doing. I know, especially coming from my like background, like traditional like mental health settings, oh, maybe they just need to like study more, or maybe it's just like a tutoring thing, like just put them in tutoring, like we don't need to change schools. Like with those tough conversations, how did you handle those?
It's always a tough conversation, and there may be some parents that don't agree because they have fixed in their head, the expectation that they expect, and they know their child, but they may also even having a conversation with them, and even if the child didn't come to us, at least the parent knew that we were available for them. And, status is an important thing sometimes. We are a country of immigrants. We come to do better, right? But then we have our traditional, people that aren't immigrants that have always been there that also want the expectation. But you can take a different road and get there faster than taking the traditional road if it's right for you. And that's the message that we try to give. Not everybody fits into one box. And And you have to have some empathy for a person that may be fighting it. Because I don't think that there is, say, a high schooler that doesn't want to stay in the main high school, or that doesn't want to be in the main high school. There are students that feel they need a smaller setting and would tell me that I want a smaller setting and produce and do well. And it had nothing to do with your IQ or your talents. Sometimes, you know, I've had friends that went to college with me and they were not morning people, so they went into fields that they could work nights. So they created that box for themselves, right? As an adult, you could create a box for yourself, but as a young person, you can't. It's made for you. And if it's made for you forcefully, nobody gets anywhere when they don't want it in their heart, right? If you have a purpose, remember, if you have the why, like it's very common these days, people say the why, right? If I have the why that is clear, then I will battle anything, right? But when you can't make those decisions because you're too young, that goes against what you can do, right? So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
So as a principal, what made that school so unique compared to like a traditional high school, would you say?
Oh, I thought it was the best place in the world. I really did. I loved it. And it really makes me emotional to think about that because my students were the best. They were the best. My teachers were the best. I think we had a little world there that was committed to just making it a safe place where students would walk in and feel okay, regardless of what was happening around. And I always used to say, I really, once you're in here, you're in here. I'm not part of that outside world. It's, this is the safe place, and and these are the rules here, and this is what we do. I really don't care what's happening out there. This is different. This is the safe setting. So I think it was training the staff, being very diligent about the goals. We had a clear vision of what we wanted. We had a clear program of regulation, behavioral and emotional regulation. We had a lot of reflection. The goal for the program to work is for the students to understand what happened throughout the day, when it happened throughout the day, get feedback as it happened, and then at the end of the day be able to reflect with their team, which consisted of a teacher, a counselor, and an aide, a paraprofessional. And it's that reflection because can you imagine if you do that, if you go to work and your boss says to you, okay, this is where you did it great, this is where you need to improve, and then we're going to reflect at the end of the day and you're going to have your next step. Like, well, I'm going to be pretty good, right? Especially, when you mentor teachers and things, that's a great thing, right? Reflection, 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 what's my next step? So I think that was something that we did. I enjoyed training staff. I enjoyed training the counselors. And the psychoeducational piece was very important, that we do groups. With the students in the small classroom setting, they ate lunch together. My feeling was that I never was a fan of large cafeterias because that's where most of the negative stuff happens. But in a classroom setting, when you're sitting at a table with your teacher and having lunch together and sharing a meal, that makes all of the difference because students then get to know each other. And they could be very supportive of each other. The goal was, if this one is having a hard time, we all lift him or lift her. And I think that made for a family-like situation.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. And we know a lot of kids who attend alternative schools are struggling with things that are even outside of the classroom. So how important would you say mental health support is in helping students succeed?
And your question is about outside of the school? How can we provide more outside of the school?
Well, we know that students struggle with things outside of the classroom. So in mental health, how is it important in supporting that student, whether it's outside or even inside the
Well,
classroom?
that's universal with any school.
Yeah.
Any school. I mean, that helping students understand how to emotionally regulate their behaviors is starting in elementary. I know Long Branch does a good job with it. In a lot of school districts where the students are learning how to breathe, right?
Yeah.
How to slow it down. And I'm a yoga teacher, so that's something that I know Long Branch does a great job with. And that carries with you. And I saw it when I was principal. The younger students were taught to self-regulate, and by the time they get to middle school, it's there. So it's important for every grade, because we don't have control over everything that happens in the life of a child outside. And that's why, I don't know if you're familiar with the ACE, which is Adverse Experiences questionnaire, which ranges from a young age to 18, and the things that could impact a student and how it can impact them in the future, right? Don't have there's no educator who has total control of what happens in the community, but research shows if one influential person is in the life of a student, that student can have more resilience than a student that doesn't. So regardless if your world is falling apart outside of school, if you have those teachers or friends or neighbor, somebody that can protect you, that's going to create resilience, and resilience is important. But also, I know that I grew up in Long Branch. I graduated from Long Branch, and we always had teachers that extended themselves to us. And just knowing that you can come and talk to somebody in school. Now, mental health services have expanded, and there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that work with students, and you have better trained counselors now that address that. And that's a hard question because we don't have control over everything that has. But if teachers and people that are involved with students know that if they give them their genuine and kind ear, that can go a long way.
Thank you.
And what roles do relationships with teachers, counselors, and staff play in helping students get back on track?
Oh, just as we talked about, just one person can be a mentor to a student that they'll always remember. I was watching this show about athletes who are calling somebody that helped them get where they were, and it was just one person. It could be one teacher, that they remember gave them those messages, or like I said, a neighbor or someone like that. But I think our job in schools is to make sure that a student finds somebody that's like that.
And in middle school, my last year of middle school, I had this reading teacher. Her name was Mrs. Flores. And I remember her so distinctly because we were peak COVID, so it was we didn't have our 6th grade year, we didn't have our 7th grade year that much, and then we did have our 8th grade year, and she was from Audrey W. Clark. So when she came to our class, we had some kids that just didn't listen and just didn't like reading, and I remember her patience so vividly, but also her understandingness. She would tell us all the time about her experience being in the school and how how she was more understanding as to why students acted the way that they acted in her classroom. And it was I remember her kindness so well. She made so many of my friends at the time who didn't like reading, who didn't have the patience for reading, sit down and want to read a book. And it was I realized the impact that she had not only on me, but on everyone around us. If you were to ask anyone from our class, do you remember this teacher, they would say yes, because of the impact that she had on us. Mm-hmm. And it was really refreshing because it was I saw, I think that, even in high school now, we experience some teachers who just don't, really, give the time and attention, especially in, this school. But, in that time that, when I had those interactions with my teacher, I would just be so excited to go to class. I would just love, talking to her because she was so, compassionate. but she was also firm. Like she was very like we're gonna do this, and I understand things are going on, but this is what we're gonna do, and just a great teacher all around. So like you explaining the environment of like how teachers like want to be there, and it's like I feel like when I think of Audrey W. Clark, I feel like teachers who are compassionate and caring because they understand that things do go on that impact the students that they're teaching. So it's like for her to transition from that school into our school and just bring everything that she learned from there to like our school just impacted us so like greatly. I can speak from experience too.
Thank you, because that supports everything that I was about, that I wanted. And training the teachers to be like that with the students, and to stop and think and reflect. And it's a mirror of, are you aware of how your behavior is impacting on other people, right? Are you aware of that? And also creating compassion within the classroom so that the students care about the one that's creating a disturbance, right? And I'm sure Ms. Flores did that. She would take time and do that. But that was what we trained, and I had a wonderful, team leader, Kathy O'Connor, and a wonderful second team leader, Megan Muller, who is still there. And we worked very closely together to make sure that the teachers were on the same page. And when we got a new staff member, they were trained in the same way. The rules were the same throughout the building. It was not one person because they shout or scream gets it. No, it's the same expectations, clear, like Brene Brown, who is a social work researcher, says, clear is kind. If you have clear expectations, then everybody follows. And not just one teacher letting the kid get away with it and the other one not. No, everybody follows the same rule. It creates a formity so the kids know. When we have structure, all of us need structure. If you go somewhere where sometimes something applies and sometimes it doesn't, or maybe it worked yesterday and it's confusing, then you can't you can't do what you're going to do. You have to have clear expectations, like I'm sure Ms. Flores had, where she expected from everybody, but she explained and reflected, and no, we're not going to do that, We're going to do this, and real clear. And sometimes people would come in and when training the teachers to do that, initially they may have been uncomfortable with it because you do have to be firm, like you said, you do. It doesn't matter, and not all the students are going to like it, but if you stick with it and you have it throughout the whole building, it works. You can't be wishy-washy. You can't have some teachers that do and some teachers that don't, some counselors that get, or I didn't allow phones. Phones were collected back then. And I know that we're going to start the bell-to-bell rule in September, right? But we always did it at Audrey W. Clark. And I did it because of the distraction and the problems that it created. A lot of people didn't believe me back then. But now it's coming. Research is showing that it just doesn't work, right? And it didn't create problems. It was expected, and we did it.
I think it's also very apparent in the way that a student receives the teaching and how a teacher teaches when the teacher is passionate and cares about the students and what they're teaching. Like oftentimes, even me personally, maybe the girls I'm sitting with, and students in general, when I'm in a classroom where the teacher likes what they're doing and the teacher wants to be there and cares for my well-being, I receive it obviously much better. And so even if, like you said, there's rules and stuff like that, it's not something that bothers me because I'm happy to be there. And so it's really nice to hear that you guys spend so much time training and counseling these teachers because it does make a big difference when we're learning.
Right. And I had great teachers in Long Branch when I was in school. I had an English teacher, and she was very firm. You said English. I had an English teacher in high school. Her name was Miss Vogel. And Miss Vogel was a true professional. She was very strict, and she would walk through the class like very stiffly, and she would look at you. But she prepared me for college, and and I enjoyed going there because I knew that she was taking me and the class very seriously. She had a goal, and it was to make us the best students. So, yeah, it does matter. And
Yeah.
and she has since passed, but she was very good.
Uh,
During your years,
yeah.
during your years as principal, what are some of the biggest struggles students were facing? Like, what is one of the biggest things that you were like, okay, this is affecting a lot of us?
You mean within the school community, or within the community, or within the country?
Like the students, for example, like the students in your school, what do you think was one of the most prominent issues that they were facing or struggling?
Attendance was something that I think never goes away, right?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, or the needs that the student may have outside of the school. So that was probably one. But we made a lot of home visits and went to get students, and there's a lot of stories that I could tell you about how I would go get students. But attendance was probably the one. I have to tell you that in terms of conflicts, like physical fighting and things like that, was not something that was my primary problem. The building ran well, and we had few conflicts, physical conflicts within our building, which I thought showed that the students would get to us before a conflict got out of hand.
That's good.
So what are some ways that schools can better support students who may be dealing with like issues like anxiety or depression or like any signs of like stress or trauma?
I think Maria Eduarda and Maria Luisa said when a teacher gives them attention and you feel that someone is there listening to you, that in itself can help you with your anxiety and depression, because you are then going to go to somebody and talk and maybe not explain it in the same way, but the teacher or your counselor will identify that you need attention and refer you to the proper places, right? And start talking about it. Because you may be anxious and depressed and not know what it is. Sometimes we can't identify depression. It's like low energy, you're moody, and also something that we have to be very much aware of is that, back in the day, we had like kids that explored with alcohol or explored with, but now we have so many different things that are out there that help sometimes the student feel better and soothe some of their emotions or anxiety. And we call that, a co-occurring, right? Because then you start using a substance, but what came first? The anxiety or the addiction or the use, the substance use? And that's something that schools are becoming more aware of looking at it, that sometimes a student may come in and is self-medicating. So that's something that I find is very important, that we educate everybody about self-medicating, because it's become very easy to self-medicate. Like it was back in the day too, but now we have far more potent and dangerous things out there that can really impact. And sometimes you don't know until the person has become addicted, right? And that's another stigma, is getting substance use disorder treatment, right? That's another treatment. It's like you could do it, on your own. But sometimes young people don't talk about it. They don't talk about it because it may be embarrassing if they're within a group, but they may be doing it quietly. So I think if there's somebody that is observing you and watching you, like you said, your teachers, I think you have a better chance of getting services or the help you need quicker.
On the topic of like substances, like a coping mechanism, I feel like especially now in our generation, like we've learned that, like, sometimes it's so like passed over because it's like, oh, like all the kids are doing it, so it's like, how deep could it actually be? But when sometimes you sit down to think about, like, it's like you said, like, what came first? Was it the mental illness, or was it the, the usage of the drugs? And maybe sometimes it is just the usage, and then, like, there's other problems. But sometimes it's a lot likely, like, you're going through stuff at home and you see your friends doing this, you do it, and then you see that it helps you feel better in a sort of way. So I also feel like your peer influence is a big thing as well. Like, in our age, it's like people know that there are certain things that you use that make you feel better, make you forget things, and it's not ever a permanent solution, but a temporary one. And when it does become temporary, you want to use it all the time to maybe so that it kind of feels permanent at the moment. So it's kind of like, oh, like, I'm just going to keep doing the same things over and over again. Maybe I'll feel better and it'll just last longer. And I feel like that's like where addiction becomes like really bad, especially like in high school, where it's all around you, it surrounds you, like you just see everyone doing it. So it's kind of like, oh, well, like, how bad can it be? And then sometimes people forget that the reason they are doing this is because there's a deeper meaning. So bringing up the usage of substance, especially in like a high school setting and like a school setting where like pressure can eat at you, like your grades, like stuff at home, friends, all of that. I feel like especially like in our teenage years, it's where a lot of our problems are. Obviously not like adult problems, but like where you're more focused on the smaller problems, and those smaller problems become bigger. So addiction runs like really, it's like a really high thing, especially in high school, because a lot of teens don't also like talking about their mental health. And it's like, oh, like, like, why talk about my mental health when I can just, have another option? And yeah.
Yes. And thank you for sharing that, because it is hard when you're a teenager sometimes to talk about how your feelings. That's why small groups are important. Like you three ladies are together, you can talk about things, right? It's good to form small groups where there is discussion. That's why eating lunch together in small settings is good, because you start talking, right? I think you should do more of that, because, and empathy and understanding that, not, you're born to do the best you can. There's nobody in the world that was born wanting to be addicted to a substance. It just wasn't, That's something that happens with life. And life problems are relevant. If you're a teenager, those are major problems. If you're an adult, your problems are major problems. It doesn't change because of your age. Problems are problems, and your coping mechanisms. And sometimes genetically, like, you can meet somebody that has gone to college and has explored, and then they leave and they stop and they have a life and they're productive. And then some can't because they become addicted, and is that chemical, different? Everybody's different, right? Some people can drink socially, some people can't. And we don't know that at a young age. We don't know how we're going to react to it. And some people, like you said, take that exploration of trying something to feel better, right? But I think when teenagers have, going back to it again, somebody that they can rely on and talk to that's not going to be judgmental, they'll open up more. And that's always been the case. But I don't know, social media has brought a lot more pressure to your generation, right? And the expectations of that. I mean, and there's some young people that are choosing to get off of it for a while, take a week break off. I know, I'm a clinician, so I tell my clients, take a 2-week break. And I have to tell you, they are always happier when they genuinely take a 2-week break. But it's a lot of, our brains can only take so much. And then, there's so much that comes up in social media, and then we just get more addicted to collecting more information. And that's overwhelming as a student in high school. And there's wonderful things too, but also there's a lot of ugly stuff that you have to be exposed to, right?
Yeah. And with being a principal, where has the road taken you after leaving Long Branch Public Schools?
Oh, well, when I left Long Branch, I had decided that I wanted I wanted to formally practice yoga, learn more about yoga and that kind of lifestyle, which I did, and I also wanted to go back to my therapy roots, and so I did. I started working with a friend who asked me to go help her at her agency, and I did some work on immigration. I did psychosocials for individuals working on their immigration status. So I did that for 2 years, and I also worked on in-home services that the agency was working on. And from there, I also began mentoring principals. So I mentored principals for leaders to leaders, which I'm still doing, going into my 11th year. And now I work as a clinician at a nonprofit in Asbury Park, where I work primarily with women, primarily Latina women, and I also teach yoga there for mature women. So I've kept busy, and I'm always learning. I still go to classes. I still keep my license as a clinician, and I keep in touch with schools through my mentoring of principals, which I enjoy very much.
That's good.
And I travel. I've traveled a lot.
And would you say that Audrey W. Clark has like shaped you and your career path that you now follow?
Oh, absolutely. Because I gave, I did that for a long time, and it was something that I did wholeheartedly for a long time, and I loved it. So yes, I always have that with me. It's a very special place for me.
Ms. Vega, again, thank you so much again for joining us here.
Appreciate it.
And we appreciate you for joining us here. This was like very insightful, and thank you again.
You guys are wonderful.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for listening to Social with a Side of Justice.
We hope today's conversation helped you think differently, learn something new, or feel more connected to the issues of mental health and access to care.
Join us next time as we continue the conversation.
Because justice starts with understanding and change starts with conversation.
If you or someone you know is struggling, you're not alone.
You can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline anytime. It's free, confidential, and available 24/7.